The top court yesterday rejected telecom companies' appeal against the government's definition of adjusted gross revenue and allowed the Department of Telecommunications to recover dues worth 1.33 lakh crore from telecom majors. So a big setback there for telecom companies. Let's go across to Sakshi for more. And Sakshi, this was a 10-year legal fight, but now the big question, how are they going to pay these massive fines?
Absolutely, Gargi, a big blow and of course a big setback to all telecom firms. And to decode what this means, we have Rajan Mathews joining us all the way from Egypt on the phone line. So Mr. Mathews, first up, what do you make of the top court verdict?
So clearly, a disastrous verdict for the telecom industry. This has been going on for some 16 years in terms of the critical definition of adjusted gross revenue. The problem is that the issue is now centering around the penalties and the interest, which are far and away, it's about 3 or 4 times the amount of the original claim. So that, compounded basis has now put the industry in a situation where there's hardly any reasonable way to expect that this can be retrieved or reclaimed from customers going forward. So this really puts the industry in a bind in terms of saying, where are we going to get the resources to pay the significant amount of money?
Right, sir. And, for our viewers to understand, why is the Bharti Airtel stock not as hammered as Vodafone Idea? What do you make of that?
All of the companies obviously have the resources, in a sense, from the parent companies. So Voda, Idea are not small companies, and Bharti Airtel is not a small company. But the problem is when you look at the industry and then the specific company, the perception on the street appears to be that Voda Idea, when you look at the individual telecom business on a standalone basis, appears to be less healthy than its competitor, both Jio and Airtel. So the ability for Voda Idea to generate the revenue, if at all they choose to then go ahead and pay these massive amounts, is less than perhaps Airtel and Jio in their individual capacity. So I think that is the perception on the street. Obviously, Vodafone Idea going through its combination at this point. They are projecting significant gains as a result of that, but obviously the street doesn't seem to give them credit for this at this point. So obviously much more difficult for them, if at all they need to go into the market to raise the funds. The debt obviously is not generating the returns it should, and the stock prices based on the valuation of the market is low. So obviously that puts them in a more difficult position in terms of raising the required funds going forward.
Right. So from what I understand, sir, you're saying that the stock impact of this is based on the financial health of the individual telcos, right? And their viability to pay back this sum.
That seems to be the perception on the street. Actually, you're right.
Okay. So you're saying this is the perception on the street at the moment.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. And what about the payment from the defunct companies? This case dates back to 2005. So what about all the telecom companies that are now essentially defunct?
So it's a good point. If you look at the chart that was presented by the DOT, there were some 14 companies, and that is the tragedy of the situation. At one point, there were 14 companies competing in the telecom space, now reduced to 4. And that goes back to the issue of the government attempting to reclaim these amounts of money. Obviously, some of the big companies, Arcom, Aircel, are in liquidation or in NCLT. So again, the question will be how much on the rupee will they get back, if at all anything? How much will the government get back? Unlikely that they're going to get any of that back. Some of those other companies like Etisalat and others have left the country pursuant to the 2G Supreme Court order. So again, how will that be reclaimed? Totally unclear. So what appears to be the situation forward is that the industry, the 3 or 4 remaining operators, are going to be the focus of any of the attempts of the government to reclaim this money. And again, that appears to be a little unfair given the overall ruling of the AGR. And again, I just want to make one thing clear, Sakshi. If you look, what is troubling is that it started off as a relatively minor thing in terms of the assessment of AGR versus what got paid. The net difference was not all that significant. But what unfortunately has happened is that because of the time spent in litigating this matter, the penalties and the interest on interest has now become the significant burden in terms of the total payout. And please remember that for a significant portion of the time, TDSAT had ruled that the AGR needed to be redefined, and you can't blame operators for then adopting that, because that becomes the law of the land. The Supreme Court or no other court gave a stay on the TDSAT ruling. It was only subsequently that the Supreme Court struck it down. So again, operators are caught in this anomaly of having to account for it in terms of a TDSAT ruling, which was the law of the land, and then subsequently kind of going back retroactively and saying, no, I'm sorry, there was no jurisdiction on TDSAT, and so now you have to pay the penalty and the interest. So that in my mind appears to be a little unfair.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us that perspective and for joining us all the way from Egypt.